Welcome to War Bios, where we delve into the most pivotal battles in history, examining the strategic context, operational art, and human element that shaped their outcomes. Today, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating and lesser-known conflicts of the early medieval period, the Battle of the Avars, which took place around 626 AD. This battle marked a crucial turning point in the struggle between the Byzantine Empire and the Avar Khaganate, a powerful nomadic confederation that dominated the Eurasian steppes. The Byzantine Empire, still reeling from the devastating wars with the Sassanid Persians, faced a new and formidable threat in the form of the Avar Khaganate. This nomadic power had been expanding its territories rapidly, absorbing various Slavic and Germanic tribes into its orbit. The Avars were master horsemen, skilled archers, and adept at siege warfare, making them a force to be reckoned with on the battlefields of Europe. The Byzantine Empire, under the leadership of Emperor Heraclius, was a complex and multifaceted entity, with a rich cultural heritage and a strong military tradition. However, it was also an empire in decline, struggling to maintain its territorial integrity and protect its borders from the constant threats posed by neighboring powers. The capital city, Constantinople, was the linchpin of imperial power, a heavily fortified metropolis that controlled access to the Black Sea and dominated the trade routes between Europe and Asia. At the heart of the Avar Khaganate was the enigmatic and feared Khagan Bayan, who had united the various Avar tribes under his leadership. Bayan was a cunning warrior and a skilled politician, able to navigate the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized the politics of the Eurasian steppes. He saw the Byzantine Empire as a rich prize to be plundered, and he began to make preparations for a massive campaign against Constantinople. The Avars began to mass their forces along the Danube River, which marked the border between their territories and those of the Byzantine Empire. Heraclius, aware of the impending threat, started to mobilize his own troops, calling upon the thematic armies of the empire to assemble and prepare for battle. The year 626 AD proved to be a pivotal moment in this unfolding drama. The Avars, having completed their preparations, launched a massive invasion of Byzantine territory, sweeping across the Danube and into the heart of the empire. Heraclius, determined to defend his capital, rallied his troops and prepared to face the Avar horde. The fate of Constantinople, and indeed the entire Byzantine Empire, hung in the balance as these two titans of medieval warfare clashed in a struggle that would decide the course of history. As the Avar army approached the walls of Constantinople, the city's defenders steeled themselves for the impending siege. The Byzantines had fortified their capital with impressive walls and defenses, but they knew that the Avars were skilled at breaching such strongpoints. Heraclius, aware of the gravity of the situation, took personal command of the defense, coordinating the efforts of his generals and preparing to face the Avar onslaught. The first major actions of the Battle of the Avars were about to unfold, as the two armies clashed in a maelstrom of steel, fire, and blood. The fate of empires hung in the balance, and the outcome would be decided by the bravery, cunning, and strategic vision of the leaders on both sides. As the Avar army, a formidable force of approximately 80,000 warriors, approached the walls of Constantinople on July 29, 626 AD, Heraclius's defenders steeled themselves for the impending siege. The Byzantines had spent years fortifying their capital with impressive walls and defenses, but they knew that the Avars were skilled at breaching such strong points through a combination of clever tactics and brute force. The air was thick with tension as the defenders, arrayed behind the city's imposing walls, gazed out upon the sea of enemy troops stretching before them like a dark, undulating tide. The Avar forces, led by their enigmatic leader, the Khagan, began their assault on the city with a series of fierce attacks against the walls, utilizing catapults, ballistae, and other siege engines to try and breach the defenses. The sound of clashing steel, the scent of sweat and smoke, and the cries of the wounded filled the air as the battle raged on. The Byzantine defenders, however, were well prepared and put up a stout resistance, employing their own artillery, including the feared Greek fire, a secret weapon that could ignite and burn on water to devastating effect against the Avar troops. As the siege continued, Heraclius became increasingly concerned about the presence of a Persian army allied with the Avars, which was marching towards Constantinople from the east. He knew that if this army were to arrive and attack the city from the rear, the defenders would be caught in a vice and would likely be overwhelmed. To prevent this, Heraclius dispatched a small fleet of ships to the Sea of Marmara, where they engaged and defeated a Persian naval force that was attempting to transport troops to support the Avar siege. Meanwhile, the Avars continued their assault on the city walls, but with diminishing returns. Their attacks became less frequent and less intense as they began to suffer from disease, hunger, and exhaustion. The Byzantine defenders, on the other hand, remained resolute and continued to inflict heavy casualties on the Avar troops. As the days passed, the Avars' initial confidence and enthusiasm gave way to desperation and frustration, their morale sagging under the relentless pressure of the Byzantine defenses. One of the most significant events of the battle occurred on August 1st, 626 AD, when a large group of Avar warriors managed to break through a section of the wall near the gate of Blatrene. The Byzantines, however, were quick to respond and launched a counterattack that drove the Avars back and forced them to retreat from the breached area. This daring maneuver was led by Heraclius himself, who rode into the fray at the head of his troops, his presence inspiring his men to fight with renewed ferocity. As the battle raged on, the Avar forces began to show signs of disarray and confusion. Their attacks became increasingly disorganized, and their casualties mounted. The Byzantine defenders, sensing victory within their grasp, pressed their advantage, launching a series of counterattacks that further weakened the Avar army. In a bold move, Heraclius decided to launch a comprehensive counterattack against the Avar forces, hoping to catch them off guard and weaken their resolve. On August 7, 626 AD, a large Byzantine force, led by Heraclius himself, sallied out of the city and attacked the Avar camp. The Avars, taken by surprise, were initially thrown into disarray, but they quickly regrouped and launched a fierce counterattack. The ensuing battle was intense and chaotic, with both sides suffering heavy losses. However, the Byzantines eventually gained the upper hand, driving the Avars back and forcing them to retreat from the city. As the Avar army withdrew, Heraclius's defenders emerged from the city to survey the damage and tend to their wounded. The scene before them was one of utter devastation. The once green fields surrounding the city were now scarred and blackened, littered with the bodies of the dead and the dying. The air was heavy with the stench of death and smoke, and the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the cries of the wounded and the moans of the dying. The Avar army had been defeated, and their plans to conquer Constantinople had been foiled. However, the city had suffered significant damage, and many lives had been lost on both sides. As the Avar army retreated from Constantinople, their once formidable horde, now a disorganized mass of weary warriors, Heraclius's forces pursued them with calculated ferocity, intent on capitalizing on their hard-won victory. The Byzantines launched a series of campaigns against the Avars, pushing them out of Byzantine territory and restoring control over the surrounding regions. This marked a significant turning point in the war, as the Avars' defeat at Constantinople had severely weakened their power and morale, exposing the vulnerabilities of their tribal confederation. The aftermath of the battle saw a period of relative stability for the Byzantine Empire, with Heraclius able to focus on rebuilding and strengthening his military. He invested heavily in the empire's defensive infrastructure, fortifying key strongholds and bolstering the walls of Constantinople, ensuring that the city would never again be caught off guard by the ravages of war. The emperor also turned his attention to the empire's eastern borders, where he launched a series of successful campaigns against the Sassanid Persians, exploiting the divisions within their royal court and leveraging the strategic alliances forged with neighboring kingdoms. These victories helped to secure the empire's borders and restore its influence in the region, as Heraclius adroitly navigated the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined the ancient Near East. The Byzantine Empire's military resurgence was not solely the result of Heraclius's brilliant generalship. However, it also reflected the emperor's deep understanding of the strategic context in which he operated. He recognized that the Avar threat had been exacerbated by the empire's internal divisions and the neglect of its military institutions, and he moved swiftly to address these underlying issues. As Heraclius consolidated his gains, he also undertook a series of reforms aimed at revitalizing the Byzantine army, introducing new tactics and technologies that would enable his forces to counter the nomadic warfare of the Avars and other steppe peoples. The emperor's innovations included the adoption of heavy cavalry, the development of more agile and responsive command structures, and the integration of mercenary units into the imperial army. These reforms helped to create a more flexible and adaptable military force, one that could respond effectively to the rapidly changing nature of warfare on the empire's borders. The Battle of the Avars had a lasting impact on the Byzantine Empire, demonstrating the importance of strong leadership and defensive strategies in the face of overwhelming odds. As the historian Edward Gibbon would later write, the siege of Constantinople by the Avars was a memorable era in the history of the empire, and the deliverance of the capital was ascribed to the providence of heaven. The battle's significance extended far beyond the immediate context of the war. However, as it highlighted the enduring importance of strategic vision, operational adaptability, and logistical resilience in the pursuit of military victory. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.